What is it that you do in your teaching practice to provide effective learning experiences for your students?
I think the most important thing that I try to do is establish a relationship with them first as learners. I say to them that's for their benefit as learners, but that's also for my benefit. I don't see any point in teaching if there's not a relationship established. Now that's difficult in large lectures, but there are opportunities in workshops and tutorials to develop that relationship. So that's the first thing that I try to do, and that's mutually beneficial. If I'm engaged, their learning is more likely to be enacted. The second thing that I try to do, and it's reasonably easy in the teaching space that I'm in at the moment, is to relate any learning experiences that they have to the broader picture of their journey. So they've got a very clear goal. They see themselves in X number of years as a classroom teacher. So I like to make any learning experiences that they have relate to that goal. And as I said, being in primary education, that's quite easy. And being in maths education, that's quite easy because they can easily see the connection between the two.
How do you know that your teaching and learning practice is effective?
That's difficult to know. There are intuitive ways of knowing, and then there are more formal ways of knowing. Now, in a university, we have any number of formal ways, so the set and the sec, and student comments at the end of the course. But they're largely too late for the learning as it's going on. So you read the body language. You can tell by their eyes. You can tell by the level of noise in the room. You can tell by their interactions with each other. Now, they're all secondary signs of the learning, but sort of with experience of teaching, you soon get a sense of whether that's enabling their learning or whether it's blocking their learning. So yesterday, for instance, in one of the tutorials, they weren't as engaged as they should have been. And it's quite easy to tell, and then you need to take steps, obviously, to bring them back, re-engage them. So informal throughout the teaching, but then also that formal stuff at the end.
Why does this teaching and learning practice work?
It's relational, so I can't stress that enough. My teaching is highly relational, so they get a sense that they're important as learners. So that underpins it. You have to be able to read the audience because although you can prepare, and you must be prepared, the learners come to a learning experience with various things that are happening in their life. So I get to deliver tutorials across 3 campuses and they're never the same. Even though I've planned the same activities, I have similar resources, the students bring to the tutorial an X factor. So you need to be able to respond to that. So it's no good ploughing on, I'm going to get through this PowerPoint, I'm going to get through it, come hell or high water, if they're not coming with you. So I think that relational bit and being able to gauge where they are in a learning sequence are 2 very important things.
Who else says this is effective practice?
Again, we have the formal and the informal. So I'll talk about the informal first. The students. They give you very clear indications as to whether they think it's working or not. Now, they're not always the best judge because they may not know, what a learning experience officially should look like, but they certainly know what the experience feels for them as learners. So they're your main measure. So are they there? Are they there and engaged? Are they there, engaged and learning? So that's the first measure. But again, at university, we have any number of formal mechanisms for acknowledging whether things work. You set SEC scores, acknowledgement from your peers, acknowledgement from broader university sort of teaching and learning space via citations, things like that. So there's lots of ways that sort of indicate whether you're on track. The university ones are nice, but they don't make the hairs on your, I can't say head, neck stand up like it does when you get that response from students and you see something switch.
Would you call yourself a reflective practitioner?
Yes, but not necessarily in the definition that you read in the literature. So there seems to be a trend that you're not reflective if you're not blogging, if you're not doing all that sort of stuff. So I'm not a reflective person like that. So I don't write about my practice, but the students are never out of your head. So you're always thinking about, okay, so I know something didn't go well yesterday at Logan. So what am I going to do next week to fix that? I've got an opportunity tomorrow with a group at Gold Coast to make sure that I don't make that same sort of error. So that sort of reflection all the time, yeah.
How do you prepare for your classes?
There's a couple of levels of preparation. So firstly, you have to know your content. So at a university level, that's knowing your main theorists on the topic that you're teaching. It's knowing what the literature says about how children learn this particular topic. It's making sure that the resources that you need, you've communicated within the university system to make sure they're ready. So there's all of that happens prior to the lesson. But once the activity starts, whether it's a lecture, a workshop, a tutorial, well, that's when you're doing your teaching. So that's where you're responding to, what's happening. There's a group over there that's not engaged. What are you going to do? There's a group here that's already done what they haven't done yet. What are you going to do with those? So as much preparation as you can, but then a willingness to more or less go free form once you're actually teaching.
How do you work out the structure, scaffolding of the learning activities of each class?
In my particular context now, I'm responsible for teaching across 3 campuses. So I've come up with a structure that makes the best use of my content expertise, but also allows me that opportunity to develop those relationships. So the structure for the courses I teach is that I prepare a 1-hour online lecture using echo capture, and that's split into maybe 2 or 3 20-minute blocks. It's easier for them to download, easier for them to just engage at those 20-minute sections. And in that part, I do the theory around the topic and then develop any content that they need. Then there's an hour workshop face-to-face with the entire cohort at each campus. And then what I do then is develop the practical implementation of that content. So what would it look like in a classroom? How are you going to go about doing this with kids? Because one of the criticisms that we get sometimes from education students is that they see teaching as a very practical, almost like an apprenticeship sort of model, and they can sometimes give you some resistance about the theory. So you need to get a nice sort of theory practice happening. And then in the tutorial, I run some of them, but that's mainly run by the tutors. They then get an opportunity to put into practice what they've experienced at the workshop. So it's a broad narrowing down to, at a tutorial, where they're in charge of their own learning. And that structure seems to be working pretty well. They always want more face-to-face time, which is understandable, but given the university's constraints, that's the best way I can make use of my time.
How do you know that your approaches are working?
I seem to be, reiterating the formal and the informal. Feedback from students is what I value most, and they deliver that by being there. They deliver that by the level of engagement that they exhibit whilst they're there. They exhibit that by feedback, emails, that sort of thing. So I get a pretty good sense that although they'd like more time, that they're comfortable and understand that those are the limits, and I'm doing my best to work within those limits. I also get feedback from the tutors. These tutors work for other academics, and so they give you a pretty clear picture how they evaluate your approach. And then you have the official set and sec measures. What I did for the first time this semester was added a few questions to the set and sec about how they felt about how the course was run, how they felt as learners, whether there was any attitudinal change. So that will be something that I keep in my practice as well.
How do you assess learning in your classes?
There are both formal, summative, and more informal, formative assessments that I use. In the first year experience, it's a requirement to have some formative assessment. So they'll do a small piece of assessment, low stakes, and I encourage the tutors to provide a high degree of feedback. So that gets the students embedded in the course and committed to the course. So that contributes to their overall grade directly. Indirectly, each tutorial, they're required by the end of the tutorial to be confident that they can answer a set series of questions. So that provides consistency across the course because there's different tutors, different campuses, and it also allows them to get a point-in-time measure of how they're going. So they aren't assessed formally, but what I'll do the following week is I'll start the lecture or start the workshop with a recap, and then I'll ask for a show of hands. Once you get to know the students, you get to know them by name, you're much more easily able to do that. If you say a question, anyone, or if I say, Steve, what did you pick up out of the tutorial last week? So it's a mechanism for relation, but it's a mechanism also for better teaching. So that happens at the end of each week. Every couple of weeks, I'll spend some time at the workshop having a chat about assessment. That again keeps them on track. It gives me an idea of whether they're understanding the task or not. I may then need to provide more prompts. So those are the more informal types of measures that I use.
What does a student typically experience in one of your classes?
They experience a learning environment where, as best possible, they're valued as an individual. So I'll go out of my way, particularly with the tutorials, to learn every student's name by the end of the first week. Again, it's got that twin focus, relational for me and for them, but also classroom management. You can do so much more with a group where they know that you know who they are, and that gets them more engaged. They're more likely to want to deliver a quality product because they know they're accountable to you at some level. So they get that. They get an experience as best that I can at university that mirrors the experience that they'll have in schools. So they'll have the resources that are available when they're likely to be in schools. They'll have tasks that are structured as them being the teacher. So I've taught them, and it's them. They might be teaching the rest of their group, but they'll definitely be using the resources that they'll see in schools, and they get a quality experience with their tutors. I work very hard with the tutors to make sure that they understand the philosophy of the course and that they understand what it is that I expect of them in relation to the students. I'm fortunate that I've been able to nurture a group of tutors, and we've been together for a number of years now. And for the first time this year, they actually scored higher scores in the teaching than I did. So that's really good that they've come along and they're working really well as a team and developing themselves as teachers.
How do you know that learning is taking place?
In the tutorials, it's a lot easier because you've got a smaller number of students, so you can ask quite direct questions. Mark, what do you understand by this concept? And then you get a very clear picture. In the workshops, as much as possible, I do that. And again, knowing the students' names allows you to call on particular people. And even if you're not calling on them, they're aware that they may be called on, and so they're more likely to be engaged. Now, that's not done in a confrontational manner. I know the students who I'm likely to be able to ask so that they're not embarrassed. So again, you build that relationship. There's a lot more level of comfort, and they know that you actually care about them as people, and you're not there to just make a point about their ignorance, for instance. So again, most important is that informal sort of stuff. But then at the assignment time, you'll soon see whether there's a consistent set of misunderstandings. And if that's the case, it's likely that there's been something wrong with my teaching, or I haven't done it as well as I could, or haven't explained something as well as I could. So the assessment gives you a chance to see how you're going, and then again, of course, that formal set and sec process.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just what I've said many times. If you're not going to try to establish a relationship with the students, don't teach them.